Have you ever noticed that the smarter you become, the fewer people seem genuinely comfortable around you? Not because you insulted them, not because you acted superior, and not because you were trying to prove anyone wrong. Sometimes, simply asking one thoughtful question or seeing something everyone else ignored is enough to completely change the atmosphere in the room. People become defensive. The conversation suddenly feels tense, and you leave wondering, what exactly did I do? Most people assume intelligence naturally earns respect, but psychology suggests something far more complicated. The human mind doesn't only protect what it knows, it also protects what it believes. And when a different way of thinking quietly challenges those beliefs, discomfort often appears before curiosity. In this video, we'll explore why highly intelligent people sometimes make others uncomfortable, what is really happening inside the minds of the people around them, and why the ability to think deeply can become both your greatest strength and your greatest social challenge. Reason 1. They make people question what they believe. One of the first reasons highly intelligent people make others uncomfortable is surprisingly simple. They ask questions that many people never ask themselves. Not to argue, not to embarrass anyone, but because curiosity naturally pushes them beyond the obvious. A single question like, "How do we know that's true?" can quietly change the direction of an entire conversation. For someone who enjoys thinking deeply, that's exciting. For someone whose beliefs have never been questioned, it can feel threatening, because beliefs are rarely just ideas. They're connected to identity, to past experiences, to the way people understand the world. When those beliefs are challenged, even politely, the brain often reacts as if something important is being taken away. That's why people sometimes defend opinions long before they examine them. Highly intelligent people don't necessarily create that discomfort. They simply reveal it. And once someone begins questioning what they've always assumed to be true, the conversation is no longer just about facts. It becomes about protecting the way they see themselves. Reason 2. Intelligence can accidentally threaten identity. Another reason highly intelligent people make others uncomfortable has very little to do with knowledge. It has to do with identity. Most people don't build their identity only around who they are. They also build it around what they believe, their opinions, their values, their understanding of how the world works. Over time, those beliefs stop feeling like ideas that can be changed. They begin feeling like part of the person themselves. That's why disagreement can sometimes feel surprisingly personal. When someone presents a thoughtful perspective that challenges a deeply held belief, the reaction isn't always curiosity. Sometimes it's resistance. Not because the new idea is wrong, but because accepting it would require someone to admit that the way they've viewed the world for years may be incomplete. That is never easy. Highly intelligent people often discover that changing someone's mind isn't simply about providing better evidence. It's about understanding that behind every belief, there may be a person's identity trying to protect itself. Reason 3. They notice what others prefer to ignore. Highly intelligent people also have a habit that quietly changes the way they experience every relationship. They notice patterns, not just what people say, but what they repeatedly do. The friend who always supports your plans but becomes strangely silent when you succeed. The coworker who agrees with every idea in public but criticizes it in private. The conversation that sounds friendly on the surface but somehow leaves you feeling smaller afterward. Most people experience these moments separately. Highly intelligent minds naturally connect them. They begin seeing behavior instead of isolated events. And once those patterns become clear, it's difficult to pretend they don't exist. This can make other people uncomfortable, not because they know they've been exposed, but because authentic behavior becomes much harder to hide around someone who pays close attention. Highly intelligent people aren't always searching for flaws. They're simply observing what repeated actions quietly reveal. Because in psychology, Patterns often tell a far more honest story than words ever can. Reason 4. Groups often prefer agreement over truth. One conversation can feel completely different depending on how many people are in the room. When you're speaking to one person, they're often willing to ask questions, admit uncertainty, and explore new ideas. But place that same conversation in front of a group, and something changes. People become more careful, more defensive, more concerned with how they're being seen than with whether they're learning something new. Because groups don't only exchange ideas, they also protect belonging. Agreeing with the majority often feels safer than risking social rejection. That's why a highly intelligent person who asks an unexpected question can unintentionally create tension. Not because the question is offensive, but because it quietly challenges the comfort of agreement. The discussion is no longer only about finding the truth. It's also about protecting status, reputation, and acceptance within the group. And in many situations, people would rather preserve harmony than reconsider what they've believed all along. Reason 5. They see complexity where others want simplicity. Another reason highly intelligent people make others uncomfortable is that they rarely see the world in black and white. Where most people look for simple answers, they naturally notice complexity. They see exceptions, trade-offs, and possibilities that don't fit into easy categories. While others ask, "Who's right?" they often ask, "What are we missing?" That way of thinking can be incredibly valuable when solving difficult problems. But in everyday conversations, it can sometimes frustrate people who simply want certainty. Because certainty feels comfortable, nuance requires effort. It's much easier to believe every problem has one obvious cause and one obvious solution. Highly intelligent people often resist that temptation. They understand that reality is usually more complicated than it first appears. Ironically, this can make them seem indecisive when they're actually being thoughtful. They're not delaying an answer because they know less. They're slowing down because they recognize that the best answer is rarely the simplest one. Reason 6. They don't follow the social script. Highly intelligent people often make others uncomfortable because they don't automatically follow the invisible rules that most social groups expect. They don't agree simply to avoid disagreement. They don't laugh at every joke just because everyone else is laughing. And they rarely pretend to be interested in an idea they don't actually believe. Instead, they ask questions. They pause before agreeing. Sometimes, they even choose silence instead of saying what everyone expects to hear. To some people, that independence feels refreshing. To others, it feels unpredictable, because social groups naturally become comfortable when people behave in familiar ways. The moment someone steps outside that pattern, attention immediately shifts toward them. Not because they're trying to stand out, but because they're no longer following the script everyone else has quietly accepted. Highly intelligent people aren't usually searching for ways to be different. They simply value honesty more than conformity. And that quiet independence can be surprisingly unsettling for people who confuse agreement with acceptance. The hidden trap: intelligence without humility. But there is another side to this story that highly intelligent people don't always recognize. Sometimes, the discomfort they create has nothing to do with intelligence itself. It comes from the way they communicate it, correcting every mistake, explaining too much, turning every discussion into a debate, or making other people feel as though they must defend every opinion they have. Knowledge alone doesn't inspire people. Connection does. The smartest person in the room isn't always the one others trust the most. Very often, it's the person who makes others feel respected while sharing a different perspective. That's the difference between intelligence and wisdom. Intelligence helps you understand people. Wisdom helps people feel understood by you. And when those two qualities work together, your ideas become far more powerful. Because people rarely resist being taught. They resist feeling small. How to share deep ideas without creating resistance. So how do highly intelligent people avoid creating unnecessary resistance? Ironically, the answer isn't to think less. It's to communicate differently. Instead of trying to prove you're right, become curious about why the other person believes what they believe. Ask questions before giving answers. Listen before explaining. And look for understanding before agreement. People rarely change their minds because they lose an argument. They change when they feel safe enough to examine their own thinking. That's why the most influential communicators aren't always the ones with the highest IQ. They're the ones who know how to lower defenses instead of raising them. They invite people into a conversation instead of pulling them into a debate. Real intelligence isn't measured by how quickly you can expose someone's mistake. It's measured by how skillfully you can help someone discover a better perspective for themselves. That is where intelligence quietly becomes wisdom. Find the people who value depth. One of the most important lessons highly intelligent people eventually learn is that not every conversation deserves their deepest thoughts. Some people are looking for understanding. Others are only looking for agreement. Knowing the difference can save an enormous amount of emotional energy. You don't need everyone to appreciate the way you think. You don't need to explain every idea. And you certainly don't need to prove your intelligence to people who have already decided not to listen. Instead, invest your time in people who enjoy thoughtful conversations. People who ask questions instead of making assumptions. People who become curious instead of defensive when they hear a different perspective. Those relationships may be fewer in number, but they are often far richer in meaning. Because true connection isn't built on thinking exactly alike. It's built on mutual respect, genuine curiosity, and the willingness to learn from one another. Final reflection. If there is one thing to remember after watching this video, it is this. Highly intelligent people don't make others uncomfortable simply because they know more. They often make others uncomfortable because they see the world differently. But seeing more is only half the journey. The other half is knowing how to communicate what you see with humility, patience, and wisdom. Real intelligence isn't measured by how many arguments you win. It's measured by how many minds you help open without making people feel small. Sometimes you'll meet people who value curiosity. Sometimes you'll meet people who resist it. You cannot control either response. What you can control is whether your intelligence becomes a bridge or a barrier. So never stop asking thoughtful questions. Never stop learning. And never hide the way you think simply to make other people comfortable. Because the world doesn't move forward through people who never question anything. It moves forward through people who think deeply and have the wisdom to help others think with them. If this video gave you a new perspective, comment the number 6 below.